Hello, Starseeds, superheroes, and magical friends, and welcome to this episode of Psychedelic Neurolinguistic Astrology Salon. And on today's episode, we are going to be talking all about the magic of the planetary ruler, Mercury. Mercury is a very special planet to me because I do have one of my major personal planets located in Gemini. The reason behind doing this deep dive on the magic of Mercury is because Mercury is now stationed direct, meaning that Mercury is no longer retrograde. So I have a whole presentation about the magic of Mercury, and we're going to go into detail as to why Mercury retrograde is nothing to be afraid of. Really, astrology is a matter of recognizing the cosmic timing of things, so as to know when would be the opportune time to act. As it comes to Mercury, this is where my personal lens comes into play because we are going to look at some of the myths and the stories behind Mercury and why Mercury is associated with things like magic and thought and intellect and communication and the mind. And this is exactly why I am also dressed up as Sailor Mercury, the brains of the group from Sailor Moon, because a lot of the archetypes and the themes in Sailor Moon as it comes to her Sailor Scouts do match up with the overall archetypal stories of Mercury. So without further ado, let's get into it. All right, everyone, welcome to the presentation all about the magic of Mercury, featuring none other than Sailor Mercury from Sailor Moon.
Mercury crystal power! Make up!
And we're going to get into all of the fun stories behind Mercury, as well as some fun facts about Mercury itself as a celestial body. So let's dive right into it. All right, welcome everyone to this presentation all about the cosmic influence of the planetary ruler of Mercury, the stories about the messenger of the gods. Mercury is the closest planet to the sun in our solar system, and it is also the smallest in our solar system. It is about the size of the Atlantic Ocean, and it's a rocky world without much oxygen or water. Throughout its 87.97 Earth day orbit, when viewed from Earth, Mercury appears to sway back and forth, and this motion is known as retrograde. And so Mercury is not truly moving backwards in the sky. It only seems that way according to our perception. However, everything is about perception, and this is where the mind and Mercury kind of meet. So we're going to get into what Mercury retrograde really means, as well as how we can deal with the current state of affairs, which is Mercury being direct. Before we get into the whole Mercury retrograde stuff, we are going to get into the mythos behind Mercury, the planetary ruler. This will give us some more insight into Mercury as its placement within our personal charts. So, getting into Mercury as Hermes, Mercury is often associated with Hermes, the messenger of the gods. He is the son of Zeus and Maya. And now Maya is actually the eldest sister of the Pleiades. I have a presentation all about the Pleiades, which I will link to in the description as well. In terms of stories about Hermes, there are two that I'm going to share. As said, Hermes and Mercury are associated with the mind and intelligence and intellect. And so when Hermes was just a baby, he was hidden away in a cave, and he crept out of his cave. And when he was just a child, he actually created a lyre using a turtle and some string. He just fashioned a lyre. So Hermes is also associated with music, and this is where mathematics and music and geometry, they all kind of reside in this hermetic domain. Going back to the story and the lyre, this was the cool invention from Hermes, but there's another story that kind of shows the more mischievous, the mercurial double side of Hermes. Because what Hermes did was he went to Apollo and he actually stole his cows from underneath his nose. I don't know how he did it, but he stole a bunch of cows that were meant for Apollo, the sun god. And he sacrificed 2 of the cows and he hid the rest. Now, Apollo had no idea where his cows had gone. It was only after some intervention from Zeus, who knew that he should have been mad at Hermes, but wasn't mad at all because he was kind of impressed with the fact that this little kid who was like barely a year old was managed to steal the sun god's cows from underneath his nose and sacrificed 2 of them. So to make amends, Hermes actually gave Apollo the lyre that he had invented. So Apollo is associated with music as well, but this gift was given to Apollo from Hermes. So those are the 2 kind of fun stories that give a little bit of perspective as to Hermes and why Mercury is then associated with the mind and intellect and even cunningness and a little bit of trickery as well. The next mythos I'm going to get into as it comes to Mercury is the Egyptian god Thoth. Now, in many stories, and if you look in some of the literature and research, you'll have Thoth and Hermes actually appear together. And I'm going to get into why in just a moment. So Thoth was actually an incredibly important deity to the Egyptians. Thoth represented the many facets of reality. He was a god of the moon, science, wisdom, secret magics, and medicine. Thoth invented writing and was believed to be the patron of scribes. As the messenger of the gods, sound familiar? He often served as Ra, and Ra is the sun god. So he's often served as Ra's intermediate between the lands of the living and the dead. And so there's some commonalities here, of course, with Hermes and the mythos behind Hermes. Thoth is known to be in many myths and many stories, but he never really has any stories about himself specifically. So it's not really known how Thoth came to be. Another thing that's interesting about Thoth is that there is a legend and a story, a myth, that there is a secret library that resides under the earth that Thoth is the caretaker of. When the Greeks and the Egyptians had cultures that melded together, this ended up with many of the gods having equivalencies, and so Thoth and Hermes were one of them. Now I'm going to get into some fun facts about Sailor Mercury, the brains of the group of Sailor Moon. I just recently got the manga of Sailor Moon, and as it's kind of interesting because Mercury has been associated with the moon. They're very close friends. In the Isis-Osiris myth, you'll find that Isis, who is the goddess of magic, and Thoth are very good friends. And so from this perspective, it makes a lot of sense that you would have Sailor Mercury be the scout that wakes up just after Sailor Moon. So in the manga, of course, you have Luna coming to Serena, telling her that she's the reincarnation of the Moon Princess. And so she wakes up. Once she wakes up, one by one, each of the Sailor Scouts wake up, and we start with Sailor Mercury. And it's even said in the manga, you are the brains of the group. And she's like a computer nerd in the comic book. She loves computers, she's super nerdy, and so it's funny because she was never anyone's favorite when I was growing up. No one wanted to be Sailor Mercury, but I've grown to appreciate her, especially since, as I mentioned, I do have my moon is in Gemini, so that makes one of my major personal planets being ruled by Mercury. She was the first scout to wake up after Sailor Moon, and her powers include like bubbles and illusion, and she has a harp as well, which is related to the lyre that Hermes created. And part of that is, if we think of magic and illusion, that's kind of related to the powers of Mercury as a whole. So that's kind of where it relates when it comes to Mercury and the planetary ruler of Mercury. Okay, so now we're going to get into the meanings of Mercury as it comes to astrology. I've gone into all of the stories behind Mercury, so this will help us have a bit more intel as it comes to Mercury in astrology. Going back to Mercury retrograde, as said in the astronomy section of this presentation, it will sometimes appear as though Mercury is moving backwards in the sky, but this is not the case. However, from our perspective, which is what matters, when Mercury is moving retrograde, this subscribes particular meaning to us here on Earth. Being that Mercury rules over the domains of communication and intellect, it is also a cautionary tale to have it be that when Mercury is in retrograde, all of those domains are restricted in some sort of way. So the story of losing your keys or entering a room and not remembering why you even entered it in the first place, or even tech going wrong, because Mercury and then Uranus, which is the higher octave of Mercury, are related to technology. Because if we think about geometry, technology, how we communicate, so even social media as to how we communicate, when Mercury is in retrograde, it's far more common to have conversations be taken out of context, to be misunderstood. So a common thing that astrologers and what I recommend during Mercury retrograde is to recognize that it is a retrograde and focus on internal communication as opposed to external communication. So as mentioned in my presentation about in my presentation about neurolinguistic astrology, we talk about internal communication and external communication. So it just means the timing of when there's retrograde may be a more opportune time to communicate internally, and with those that you have more of that inner circle with, as well as maybe it's not a good time to try things or risk things at that time. So all things to consider. Nuances are also based on where Mercury is placed for you in your birth chart. So thinking about, let's say we're going through a Mercury retrograde, think about if babies were born during that time. Those babies are imprinted with the energies of the time itself. And this goes down to the astrological starseed blueprint, which is the blueprint of all of the luminaries, all of the planets, and all of their placement specific to you. And so everyone, even you, even me, we all have a Mercury placement. And so this Mercury placement, as it comes to what Mercury is doing right now, will aspect with each other, and this particular angle or angel or anything you want to call it has a meaning behind it, which is specific to you. And this is where the personalization comes into play as it comes to astrology, and why you can't just say that Mercury retrograde would affect everyone the same way. It just wouldn't. So Mercury was in retrograde in Taurus. It actually still is in Taurus right now, but it is in much more favorable positions. So I'm going to get into Mercury aspects. Mercury, as a planetary ruler, takes on a lot of the energies of other planets it's being aspected with. So Mercury is very mutable. The signs that Mercury rules over are Gemini and Virgo, and those signs are mutable. They're able to flex. And in an alchemical kind of standpoint, as it comes to astrology, you have cardinal signs, and then you have fixed signs, and then you have mutable signs. And in that flow, being mutable has its own characteristics associated with it. And as it comes to Mercury, it will meld a lot to the energies of the other planets that it is around. So that takes care of all of the fun intel as it comes to Mercury. I'm now going to get into a reading for Mercury for all signs now that Mercury is stationed direct, just in prep for the new moon reading coming up. So it's going to be a 1-card pull, and you can use this for sun, moon, or rising in each of the signs. We're going to start with Aries and go right on to Pisces for Mercury stationed direct in Taurus.